Today, we are going to map out the journey that every single one of us is on, from our very first breath to our last. And this isn't just any old map. Nope, this is a blueprint for how we become, well, us, created by one of the giants of psychology, Erik Erikson.
So let me just ask you this, right off the bat. Do you think your personality is basically set in stone? Something that was locked in when you were a kid? Or are you, right at this very moment, still a work in progress? Erikson had a pretty revolutionary answer to that, and it completely changed how we look at our own lives.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll start with Erikson's big idea, that life is a lifelong journey. Then we'll dive into those crucial foundational years, navigate the messy teenage quest for identity, and then face the big challenges of adulthood. We'll even see how Erikson took on his famous mentor, Sigmund Freud. And finally, we'll figure out how you can use all of this as a kind of blueprint for your own life.
So first up, let's get into Erikson's most radical idea, this concept of a lifelong journey. See, back then, psychology was pretty much obsessed with childhood. But Erikson came along and said, hold on, we never stop developing. He saw our whole life as this series of stages, and each one has its own unique challenge and a huge opportunity for growth.
The heart of his work is this thing called the psychosocial development theory. I know, it sounds super technical, but the secret is right there in the name. Psycho for our own internal psychological world, and social for our external world. This was a huge shift from Freud, who was all about our internal drives. Erikson believed our personality is really forged where those two worlds slam into each other, in our relationships, our culture, and our community.
So here's how it all works. At each stage, we face what he called a psychosocial crisis. Now, don't think of crisis as a disaster. It's more like a fork in the road, a turning point where we can grow. Then there's the epigenetic principle. It's just a fancy way of saying that each stage builds on the one before it. You got to lay the foundation before you can build the walls, right? And if you handle that crisis well, you're rewarded with the virtue, which is basically a new psychological strength, like hope or willpower, that you get to add to your toolkit for life.
Okay, so how does this whole journey kick off? Well, it all starts in what we'll call the foundational years. These first few stages are where the absolute bedrock of our social and emotional world gets put into place.
And it all begins right here, in the very first year of life, with the conflict of trust versus mistrust.
Just imagine it. As a baby, you can't do anything for yourself. You're completely dependent. So your entire world really just boils down to one single question. Is this place safe? Is somebody going to take care of me? Basically, can I trust the world around me?
And the answer to that question really comes down to the caregivers. When a baby's cries are answered with consistent, loving care, they learn the world is a good, reliable place. They learn to trust. And from that trust, the virtue of hope is born. But if that care is neglectful or just all over the place, they learn the world is scary and unpredictable. That's where mistrust takes root, and that feeling can echo for a very, very long time. All right, next up, we hit the infamous terrible twos. But Erikson would probably say it's more like the independent twos. This is the stage of autonomy versus shame and doubt.
For a toddler, everything is new and exciting. They're learning to walk, to talk, and they want to do everything by themselves. You've seen this, right? The toddler who absolutely insists on putting on their own shoes, even if it takes 20 minutes. The core question they're wrestling with is, can I do things on my own?
And again, how the parents react is everything. If that drive for independence is encouraged, even when it gets messy, the child develops a sense of autonomy, and they gain the virtue of willpower. But if they're constantly criticized, or if every move is controlled, they start to doubt themselves. They start to feel a sense of shame that can really stick with them.
The momentum just keeps building from there. In the preschool years, it's initiative versus guilt. This is when kids start making up their own games and taking the lead. If you support that, they get a sense of purpose. Then when they hit school age, it becomes industry versus inferiority. This is when they start looking around and comparing themselves to other kids. Doing well in school or sports helps them build a sense of competence.
And all of that foundation building leads us to what is probably Erikson's most famous stage. It's so important it gets its own section, the quest for identity. From about age 12 to 18, we step into the whirlwind that is identity versus role confusion. This is it, the single biggest question of our teenage years, maybe our whole lives. Who am I? Am I an athlete, a nerd, an artist, a rebel? What do I actually believe in? What do I want to be when I grow up? It is a time of major exploration and, let's be real, a whole lot of confusion.
Now, here's the key thing to understand.
The goal isn't really to find the one right answer. The goal is to explore the question, trying on different hats, different friend groups, different hobbies, different ideas. That's the real work of being a teenager. And when you come out the other side of that messy process, you gain the virtue of fidelity, which is the ability to be true to yourself because you finally have a solid sense of who that self is. If you don't do that work, you end up with role confusion, feeling lost and just sort of drifting along.
So what happens after you figure out who you are? Are you done? Not even close. Erikson's whole point is that the journey is far from over. In fact, some of life's biggest tests are still ahead in the challenges of adulthood.
As adults, we face three really big questions. First, in young adulthood, it's all about connection. Now that you know who you are, can you share that person with someone else? That's the crisis of intimacy versus isolation, and getting it right leads to the virtue of love. Then, in middle age, our focus gets wider. We ask, am I making a difference? What am I leaving behind? This is generativity versus stagnation. It's about nurturing the next generation, and it gives us the virtue of care. And finally, in our later years, we look back. We ask, did I live a good life? This is integrity versus despair. Finding peace with the life you've lived grants the ultimate virtue, wisdom.
Now, to really appreciate what Erikson did, it helps to see who he was building on and also kind of arguing with. So let's put Erikson versus Freud head to head. Erikson started out as a follower of Freud, but he took those ideas in a completely new direction.
This table really says it all. Look at the lifespan. Freud basically stopped at childhood. Erikson went from cradle to grave. The focus? Freud was all about internal stuff, our instincts. Erikson looked outward, to our social world. And the outcome of a stage? For Freud, if you got stuck, you had a fixation. For Erikson, if you succeeded, you gained a new strength, a virtue. Basically, Erikson took psychology out of the nursery and gave it a passport to the entire human experience.
Okay, so that brings us to the most important question of all. Why does any of this matter to you today? How can this theory be a blueprint for your life?
So what can you take away from all this? First, and this is a big one, you are a work in progress. Your personality isn't fixed, it's always evolving. Second, every single stage of life is a new chance to grow, or even to go back and heal something from a past stage. It's never too late. This framework is an amazing tool for parents, for teachers, and for just understanding ourselves better. Now look, it isn't perfect. Critics will point out that it might be a bit biased towards Western culture and that it's hard to prove with hard data.
But its real power is in the map it gives us for our own lives. So I want to leave you with this final thought. When you look at this whole journey, from that initial trust as a baby to the final wisdom of old age, which of these stages feels most real to you right now? What's the central question that you are trying to answer in your life today?